it's really an exercise in whether you're going to put one foot in front of the other, whether you can go through the uncomfortableness of putting yourself through something like that. And I suppose what you hope is that you make it, that you finish the race, and that you learn something about yourself along the way. And then ultimately that gives you a slightly raised platform of confidence that you nearly failed, you risked failure, but you were able to carry on and succeed in the end. And then you can go again, and you can go for bigger and bigger and bigger challenges along the way.
All right, let's kick off. Mark, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. I've been watching a lot of your stuff for many, many years, would you believe, since I was 15, 16 years old. I'm not as young as that now anymore, unfortunately. But and I want to say, thank you very much for this. It's a huge privilege. I really appreciate it. The work you've done, and even some of your speeches and some of the work you help with other people has been very motivating for myself, amongst many other people. And I feel like you've really helped people, thousands, tens of thousands of people, if not even more, with a lot of your work. And I just say I'm very excited.
Well, thanks for having me on. And
Of course.
I hope now watching all my videos, I need to go and check my YouTube channel and get it cleaned up and smartened up and get some new content on there.
Yeah, you can use this as well to push it up. No, I really appreciate it though. So I'd like to get into some of the early days first, if you don't mind. And I think what's really cool is, I'm a young enough guy. I'm 26 at this age now, and a lot of people, when they're starting out their careers, they find it very challenging. And I think what really stood out to me when I looked deeper into a lot of your work is some of the challenges you encountered when you first lost your sight, quite young, and you were really focusing in on that, which is very difficult to begin with. So how even was for you when you had to come to these realizations? It's a very difficult thing to face, especially at a young age.
Yeah, well, I think when I was going to say when we're young, but I think as you get older, we're all trying to work out who we are and what our identity is, and our identity is often defined by those things that we do that are recognizable. In my case, as a 22-year-old, I was studying for a business studies and economics degree, just about to sit my finals.
Mm-hmm.
I was rowing for the university, and also rowing for Ireland, and breaking into the senior team. And after graduation, I was going to go and start a job in London in investment banking or consulting or in the stock exchange. So sort of going into that finance milk round world. Now, as it happened, I think I was attracted to that world partly because everyone else was going. It was like an extension of college, but partly as well because I'd been reading Nick Leeson's book, Rogue Trader.
He was on my podcast, would you believe?
Well, was he? Yeah. I've actually I've met him. I've met him since, and he's really interesting. And Rogue Trader. I think he was a young guy himself. I'm sure he spoke about it. And there were no checks and balances, and he was probably trying to do something out of goodness to fix the problem that he had created, or the system had created. But that lifestyle, that kind of fun lifestyle where you work hard, you get paid a decent amount of money, you go out to the pub, and you get to travel around the world or work in different places, just seemed exciting and attractive to me. But I could see and I could walk at the time, and I was defined by being a student, going on that track to London. My competitive sport in rowing, and in the space of 2 weeks that changed completely when I lost my sight. So I immediately, as a young, newly blind person, I was on the outside. I felt like a spectator, so I didn't think blind people did any of those types of jobs that I wanted to do, or study, or play sport or have relationships. You know, I was still young at that time, didn't know if I was ever going to have a relationship again. So I went from this point where I knew exactly who I was, exactly where I was going, to losing my sight, feeling like I was going to have to sit on the sidelines, and then trying to redefine or rebuild or create an identity for myself before I'd really done anything, you know. So, but what it did was it made me think hard about what I could do, what I was good at, where the barriers were going to be, and maybe how I could switch it up and turn some of my disadvantages, being blind, and how I could switch that up to being an advantage.
How did that feel mentally at first when you kind of lost your sight and you lost your initial ability? Because it seems to me, even now, obviously, you're extremely goal orientated, you're extremely driven, determined, and outcome focused. So in those scenarios whereby you feel like you've lost your ability in the short term, how did that feel? Because adversity is usually where people would run away from issues sometimes unless they have that level of resiliency.
You know, I might answer this in two parts, because the first part is how I actually felt at the time, and then the second part is something that I learned a number of years later. And looking back, I went through these sort of stages of grief. But if I take the first part, I did know that my identity was wrapped up in those things that I've just described: being a student about to graduate, going and getting a job in investment banking, and rowing, being involved in competitive sport. So for the first 4 years, I was guided by that sense that I didn't want to be left behind. People were graduating, they were going off for the summer. I was supposed to be going to the Cayman Islands to teach sailing for the summer. I couldn't go because I'd just gone blind. Friends went and did that. They started the jobs in London and New York and Hong Kong. And I had this great sense that I was somehow, in the space of 2 or 3 months, I was going to miss the boat, that I was going to be left behind, which seems ridiculous to me now looking back, because it was such a short period of time. But this fear of being left behind dragged me forward to try and to get a job. Well, to first of all learn how to live on my own, to get a white stick and a guide dog and a talking computer and a talking phone eventually, to get the skills that would allow me to, first of all, turn up at an office and make myself available to work. So that, first of all, a very basic way, meant I had to be able to get from my apartment where I'd moved back from the north down to Dublin, but I had to be able to get from my apartment, get to the office, and then once I was in the office, I had to be able to use a computer in such a way that would mean I was a functioning member of whatever team I was going to be involved with. So getting a job was important. That was what I was going to do before I lost my sight. Studying, I wasn't big into studying, but it seemed to matter. It seemed to matter to me after I went blind. I wanted to get a master's, to just put myself slightly further ahead than the next person. I had this sense that I might need to be more qualified than the next person to get the same opportunity. So got the job, did the master's, went back rowing, and got silver and bronze medals in the Commonwealth Games. So that first 4 years after blindness was really a rebuilding of the identity that I'd lost before I lost my sight. Just getting back to where I'd been. Now, those goals were already set in place because I had them in place before I went blind. The second part, which I said I'd mention, is a few years later, someone told me about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. And when something changes, whenever we face a big challenge, we go through these stages. Now, they're not linear; they happen all at once and come back and go away. But it's denial, anger, bargaining, which is looking for a miracle, self-pity, and then acceptance. And I went through all of this, even though I couldn't see. I denied that I was blind. I certainly was frustrated and angry that things weren't moving along quick enough, that it had happened at all, that there wasn't a cure. I definitely hoped that I was just going to wake up one day and be able to see again. And I certainly, if I wasn't depressed, I was in a depressed state, feeling sorry for myself. And eventually I got to some kind of acceptance, but the acceptance just didn't happen in my head like a switch. The acceptance came as I started to do those things that I've just described. The work, the studying, the sport, that sort of rebuild of my identity helped me fill my life with more interesting things, so I could squeeze out the downside of the blindness.
It's crazy because I feel like between you being able to, go and compete, to go, even be able to walk and move back into Dublin, there was so much happened in between there for you to be able to build up, the ability to even do it. And when you speak about the acceptance, you think it was really about consistency. You were building in some bit of routine. You were able to kind of follow a path, because I imagine through all the levels of frustration, that's when, you want to give in, and that's when you want to just, essentially blame other people. And that 5 stages denial is fantastic, because or of acceptance, sorry, because that's when you get to the stage whereby you need to go through all these different periods, but for you, the pain can be exacerbated a lot more. So what do you think was the biggest kind of driver for you to be able to actually bounce back?
Well, you see, when something really bad happens, whenever you face some challenge that's not just theoretical, it's not just it's not just an idea. You think you're going to be worried about something. When something actually happens to you, and you're sort of stripped bare, and you don't have an option, you don't have the choice to just say, oh well, I'll go back to the way it was, and things really change. Things become quite obvious. The option for me, in a way, getting up and rebuilding your identity, getting back to the things that you wanted to do before, in my case, before I went blind, is not that remarkable, because the alternative was to lie in bed, feeling worse and worse and worse about myself. So in many ways, going and being part of the world of work and study and sport and socializing was just a much better option than being in my bedroom where I grew up as a teenager. So there was almost a pull to go and do the things that I wanted to do, but there was also a push to get away from those long days and nights of overthinking it. And that's sort of that interplay, the push and pull factors seem to get me back up and running. And the more things that I did that were enjoyable, the less and less I was inclined to go back to that bedroom, whether it was in Dublin or back at home.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You spoke a lot about identity, and I think it's interesting, because you've brought up a few times. Do you think the kind of search for that identity was very important for you to be able to, say, like, get onto that path of recovery? Or, you were kind of identifying with investment banks, as a rower, as an accomplished, student? Do you think that kind of helped you? Or do you think maybe that there could be an issue with people trying to identify as continuous things, so that, your job is your identity? Or was that really helpful for you in retrospect?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because a lot of the things that we might read are that you're not, in fact, defined by your job, that you're a full human being without those extrinsic motivators, like, I've got to be a lawyer and paid X amount, and my path is to carry on and do the hard yards for 20 years to become an equity partner in a law firm. Those, and some people really want to do that and go and do it, and they love it. Other people do it because they think they should do it, or they got on the treadmill when they sort of half thought that they wanted to do law when they were 14, and they just never get off the treadmill. and it becomes part of their identity, and people have become very scared of stepping off sideways and going in a different direction. And to answer your question, I was very early on this sort of messy identity that I had, and the specifics of it were as I've described. But now, 20 years on, I continue to think about this identity question and why we do what we do, and about in 20, kind of, I've lost all track of time with COVID, but in 2019, I went to meet Simon Sinek. Do you know Simon Sinek at all? Yeah,
super interesting guy. Yeah, super. Yeah,
so he in 2018, I did a TED talk with my fiance Simon, and through the TED community, I arranged to go and have lunch with him in New York. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I'd spent 10 years rebuilding my identity after blindness, rebuilding my identity as a competitor. And then when I fell out the window and broke my back, I sort of went from this adventure athlete to someone who couldn't see and couldn't walk and couldn't be an adventure athlete. So I started to go on this new expedition to cure paralysis in our lifetime. And when I was telling that story, all the marketing professionals that we were taking advice from were saying, well, curing paralysis is what you do. That's why you do what you do. That's what drives you. And it in a way felt too narrow. It felt like, well, then I had to reject the adventure athlete part of myself in order to be a cure hunter. And it took me a long time. It's perhaps taken me 20 years to get to this point. But I said that to Simon Sinek over lunch, and I said, as an expert in finding your why and creating your why and understanding why we do what we do, what do you make of this sort of, I've been working it for 10 years on curing paralysis, but it just feels too narrow. And he said, well, of course, that's not your why, because if you cured paralysis in the morning, you would do something else. That's what you do. And in fact, out of that conversation, I have come up with my why statement, which is everything I do is about inspiring people to build resilience and collaborate with others so they achieve more than they thought possible. And that elevates the sort of the guiding principle, or my why statement allows room for racing to the South Pole, curing paralysis, my speaking business, our global running series, Run in the Dark. They all fit under one of these three pillars: resilience, collaboration, or achieving more, or performance. So I think the identity work, and I think it's important, particularly for your audience, is to decouple the specifics of that law example, to decouple the specifics from the why you do what you do. It can be played out as a partner in a law firm, or as an entrepreneur, or as a banker, or a medic, or someone working in the caring professions, or whatever it might be. But I've just found, by really working on that why statement, which is not specific, it's very much just pillars of things that have been a pattern throughout my life that are formed probably by the time we're 20, 18, 19, 20. And then the projects that have really worked throughout my life and career, they have they seem to have been firmly fitting under that why statement, and the ones that have gone badly just don't fit.
Yeah. They're disconnected altogether. It's
Mm.
almost as if you had that self-actualization, and actually it's like the top tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that you've gone on for so long by in the detail, really focusing on just a day-to-day of new task, new project, getting it done. And that's a big thing of young people, 20 to 30, you've pretty much no idea what you're doing. You're just trying to pick, the best salary, the best role, and just keep on honing in on it. And I suppose it's not till you get slightly older, you have a bit more perspective, you might have a family, you might have other things going on, is that you try to figure out those things. And that's why people in their maybe 30s and 40s and 50s start giving back to the world versus actually taking it when they're quite younger. But it's cool from your perspective because you've been trying to, accomplish more, even all your big excursions, which we'll definitely get into now soon as well. They've always been focused on either charitable work or raising awareness or whatnot. So that's where it was very, very unique from your perspective, because as you were quite young, and this is why you got such amazing rewards for it as well, because people are slightly thinking different things. I think this could go back to the fact that, you've had that sense of kind of gratefulness for just being alive, essentially. You've had two very, very, um, you know, crazy injuries that have made you much more grateful and appreciative versus someone who's just running around chasing the next salary hype.
Yeah, well, I do. It certainly made me think, because after losing my sight, when I was looking at going through the standard career path of getting on whatever treadmill I was going to get on, I did look at it and think, well, knowing what the guys were doing who had gone ahead of me, there were just elements of their jobs that I knew the blindness wasn't going to allow me to do. Those little extra bits that you do in your career to go, to go the extra mile to get to the next rung on the ladder. There were just a few things where I thought, I'm just, what, no matter how hard I try, they're always going to be a disadvantage. So I had to reflect and think, well, what direction could I go in where the blindness became an advantage? And it was a little bit by chance, because after 4 years, I'd handed in my master's thesis. I got the silver and bronze in the Commonwealth Games, and the company that I'd been working for, I went from an agri-food business in Ireland to a consultancy, a .com consultancy back in 2000, and it had loads of venture capital money, but precisely no work. And it eventually went bust. But it didn't matter to me because I was so young. I had no mortgage or anything like that. So it was really interesting to watch it all blow up, and then really blow up. But so I had no job. I got the medals, handed in my master's thesis, and then I had to think, okay, well, I've now rebuilt my identity as with the blindness. Things are the study, the sport, the work, the socializing was all going well, and then it was in a way almost more difficult because I had a blank page then, and I knew what I could do and what I couldn't do. And I met a blind guy called Miles Hilton Barber, who was about 30 years older than me, and he did all these adventure races and desert runs and so on. And then he went into companies and spoke about his experiences and shared his insights. And I thought, well, doing adventure races and going into companies and meeting people and presenting, all of those things sound interesting to me. So he said to me, well, why don't you just go and do it? So I stood in for him at an event, and he was away doing an adventure race, as it happens, and it was in Ireland. I stood in for him, and that started my speaking career. And I didn't go into investment banking, which I did consider at the time. But it kind of flipped the blindness from being a disadvantage to being an advantage.
Of course, yeah. And it's crazy because like the endurance element of it. So about a backstory, like I have the highest respect for endurance athletes, actually specifically like anyone that goes to these ultra marathons, or even what you were doing in the Gobi Desert, which is, you know, your 6 marathons in 7 days, which we'll get into as well. I just think that there's so much like mental of this. I believe it's more mental than physical. I feel
Oh
like
yeah,
physical goes to a certain limit, and I feel like then your body just turns off and it just becomes mental.
yeah,
That's my honest opinion of it. Looking at other people, me trying to do marathons, this is my taking from it. So from your perspective, it gets amplified because you have a, you know, a quote unquote constraint on what you're originally meant to be doing. Um, so how was it again? You know, so you picked your reason. This is the reason why. But what were some of the initial challenges you had, especially when you were looking at the Gobi Desert, which is how much people really pass that? Probably a very low probability to begin with.
yeah. But I had gone back into rowing, and had been training 12 times a week, and I was very fit. And the guy I was doing the race with, Nick Wolf, he was very fit. Now, we had never done a marathon before. With all the rowing training, we had that sort of endurance base. But the Gobi Desert event, it was set up. It was the first year it had happened in 2003, and it was set up by a woman who had won the Marathon Day. I'm going to get my French pronunciation wrong, but Marathon des Sables, and she'd won it a load of times. And she set up the 4 desert series, of which the Gobi Desert was one. Then they're called stage races, so you carry all your own food on your back for the week, all your clothes, baby wipes, the wash kit, and your sleeping bag, and then they provide the tent and the water. So we went, and it was up in northwest China. I hadn't really been outside Europe, I don't think, at that stage in 2003. So we flew to China, met up with the other people who were doing the race. There were 45 others, and then we started off on day one into this race. Now, we had been reading a book called Bravo 20 by Andy McNabb, which is about the first Gulf War. In fact, Nick had been reading it to me on the plane and in the few nights before we went to the desert. So by the time we got to the start line, we had this sort of book in our mind, because these guys were dropped into Iraq. They got found out, and then they were tabbing across the desert. So we had this in our mind that we were sort of like these guys, and we were convinced we were going to win the whole race. So we went off, and about 10 minutes into it, a marathon on day one, I thought we were going pretty quickly. I said to Nick, "How are we doing?" He said, "We're last." Oh. Now we picked up as we went on through the event, but it was desert, but I thought it was going to be sandy desert, as did Nick, and it turned out to be dried riverbed. There were rocks everywhere, and it was really not blind friendly at all. So it was pretty miserable, worse for a blind person, and I suppose as you say, that particular race laid the foundations for many of the races that came next, and ultimately the South Pole race. But I think we came about 22nd out of the 45 in the end. But it was hard yards, and a great achievement at the end of it.
That's incredible. Do you think that you kind of break through after a while? Because, for instance, you were very fit from rowing, no doubt about that. But again, like, this is it's a different thing, you know. It's apples and oranges at the end of the day. You have the same body and you have the same endurance and stamina, but again, like, you are doing something that's completely different in a new continent. You know, you had no like all weather training. For instance, if you were going to do something like that now, you'd go to the mountains and like Pyrenees or whatever, prepare or something like this. You had none of that. So, like, let's say you're going through the first marathon. How are you breaking this down in your head? Are you just slowly taking it kilometer by kilometer, or like what are some of the approaches?
Certainly have to break it all down. But I mean, this was for a lot of people who do endurance events, you know you're signing up for something that's going to be deeply uncomfortable, and you're right from what you said earlier on. It is a test of the mind over the body, really. So I suppose you're in a battle with yourself, and even in a team, I had to be guided by Nick, and both of us were going through different experiences at different times. Like, you know, when he was full of energy, I was wrecked, and whenever I was having some good moments, he was tired. But he not only had to do the race, but he also had to look out for me and tell me what was coming up, where to put my feet when the rocks were all over there. So he was constantly talking to me as we were going through the race. But yeah, it's really an exercise in whether you're going to put one foot in front of the other, whether you can go through the uncomfortableness of putting yourself through something like that. And I suppose what you hope is that you make it, that you finish the race, and that you learn something about yourself along the way. And then ultimately that gives you a slightly raised platform of confidence that you nearly failed, you risked failure, but you were able to carry on and succeed in the end. And then you can go again, and you can go for bigger and bigger and bigger challenges along the way.
It's all perspective, because you know, for someone else, they would finish day one and think, oh, how can I get up for day two? But like, that's like, it shows so much about even like your own perspective on things, to say, I did day one, I have the confidence to do it. Now you're walking into the next day, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. That stands way more than, you know, like the short term happiness. I think you're always like
now, to be clear, at the end of day one, I didn't think I would be getting up to do day two.
What happened?
We're desperately dehydrated for a start. You know, and that was a concern, because, you know, we'd sort of been reading around and learning about what could go wrong. So if in those endurance races, if you can't pee, then you can be in trouble. So we, at the end of it, we didn't, you know, we're going back in the bus, we're getting the water, and we didn't pee for about 4 hours into the night. So this was a big topic of conversation on day one. But we got up the next day, and the body has a remarkable capacity to recover. So day two was pretty terrible for about the first 30-45 minutes, and then it was as good or as bad as day one. Same again with day 3, 4, 5. The only thing is, on those races, your feet get pretty badly, if not badly, blistered and cut, because you try to avoid that. It's almost like they're bruised. So every morning that you're getting up, as you're going through it, it takes longer and longer for whatever the body's releasing to numb your feet, essentially, so that you can actually run and move and run up these rivers and over sand dunes and through these dried river beds. But I think the Gobi March was the first race, and I did loads of other races after that. But I always look back on that one and think that that's probably where I learned the most about myself, and about how far I could go, because that was, every day I was coming to sort of the point where I just wanted to be taken out of there, where you just wanted to give up, and that came back again and again and again. And also, you know, it comes back and informs all of the races I've done, comes back and informs a lot about how I approach everything that I do now, but around clarity, around commitment, around connection with other people, around trust with other people that I work with. So, you know, I was doing these races because I enjoyed doing them. I was doing them because they fed my speaking business. And I was doing them as an exercise in learning about myself and how teams worked. So, you know, I'm not saying I was any kind of a scientist studying these things, but we were definitely learning about how we reacted in these very extreme situations.
Yeah, it's literally the most extreme scenarios you can put yourself through, which is obviously, you know, complements everything else you do outside. When you were like looking at these events, especially as time goes on, so even looking at the South Pole trek, which again is absolutely remarkable. So over 770 kilometers, 14 hours a day, you were trekking 200 pounds on the back of on your back for over 40 days. How do you think about this as well in terms of like resiliency? Because you come back every day for this. You literally come back to the
Yeah,
shitter every day. And then on
yeah.
top of that, then you're with a team. So how does that team like evolve and move as well? Because there's personalities, there's pain, there's so much other things that are at play.
Yeah, well, again, I as I've got older, I've come to doing it. I was doing the physical stuff in those first 10 or more years. In the last 10 years, I've been thinking and studying and looking about at all of these things through the lens of philosophy and psychology and neuroscience. So I I look back at the approach in all of those races now, and I have this sort of resilient cycle, this kind of mental model based on Stoic philosophy, and that is one of have to get through the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief, of denial, anger, and bargaining, and self-pity and acceptance. Once you're kind of in control of your own thoughts, then I go through this cycle of facts, anchoring, and hope. So that is facts, confronting the brutal facts of your situation, whatever they may be, just like a facts stock take. You're not trying to fix anything, look too far forward, look too far back. You're just confronting the good, the bad, and the ugly of what you've got going on. And anchoring is about anchoring ourselves with a sense of control by accepting that we've got options, even if they're not perfect. What we can control and what we cannot, what we can influence and what we cannot. And then the third part is about extending timelines beyond the crisis or the challenge, or beyond the moment. So extending timelines towards some better future point fueled by hope. So I'm running this cycle all of the time for the small stuff on a daily basis, but also I was doing it at minus 50, 3 weeks into the South Pole, at times when I thought I couldn't put my foot in front of the other. I was doing it in hospital after I broke my back. I do it in my business. So this cycle has started to become very, very important, and is built on the lens of Stoic philosophy, but also modern neuroscience, sort of explaining what the Stoics got right 2,500 years ago without knowing what was going on in our brains. Modern neuroscience is starting to explain what is going on in our brains that the philosophers knew to be true 2,000 years ago.
That's so powerful as well. If you think about even digging into the timeline area, so when you're in South Pole and it's minus 50, or you're struggling and you're coming back from, when you had your fall and you're trying to get back, extending the timeline is often what not a lot of people want to do. So how do you plan that? Like, how do you dial into that to say, okay, I'm going to think a bit longer term, because like patience is what people of my age have begun to lose. It's what we lose from social media. It's what we lose from looking at other people's careers. We want things now. I also want things now as well. I'm no, exception to this. So it seems so difficult to do these things that no one can do, because we all just are just thinking in the moment.
Yeah. Well, look, I think the is X Factor still a reference? Instant fame is there's no such thing, and if there is, it's short lived, or it's built on flimsy foundations. So I think that's dangerous to try and, in my case, to go blind in 1998 and then to go to the South Pole within 6 months or 12 months. To make that leap would have been too much in too short a time. It actually took 10 years, and it took 10 years of making consistent small decisions, compounding over time, to get to be able to race over 43 days at sub-zero temperatures. So there is value in consistent effort over time. Angela Duckworth talks about this in terms of grit and grittiness, which is passion and perseverance for long-term goals. So, I think extending timelines towards some point in the future is important, and also to have the patience and the commitment and the grittiness to keep going and doing the unglamorous stuff that gets no recognition, that you don't really want to do, but it's all part of the I'm loath to use the word journey, but it's all part of the compounding effect over time to achieve those big goals.
It's all about doing the shit that no one wants to do.
Exactly. Exactly. I think. I mean, I dip in from time to time to Gary Vaynerchuk, and he's given it plenty and swearing the whole time. But I mean, his basic message is, when people are asking, how can I go and work on a beach in Mexico? How can I basically not work?
Yeah.
And he's totally appalled. He says, well, you can't. That's your first problem, because he has been a grafter, and the reason why he's successful is that he's done the hard yards in his particular field. And you just see that, you hear that time and time and time again from people who do great things. They're actually great at doing the unglamorous stuff consistently over time for very, very long periods of time. But, in terms of like difficult challenges that appear in my resilience cycle, for me, it's about trying to not to be caught up in this sort of short-term moment of the paralysis or the blindness or the career challenges or whatever it might be, but rather to pick some point, an unreasonably long point out in the future, to give me something to go for, to give me enough time to move from this difficult point to that better point, and giving me enough time to take enough decisions and let those compound enough so that I can actually reach that better future point. I think if we try and do things in 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even 3 years, it's too short. And I think this has been attributed to Bill Gates, but it's not. It's not. It wasn't Bill Gates who said it. I think the quote is, "We overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in 10 years." And it's because of this compounding effect. So we need to back off and go easy on ourselves on our 12-month plan, and go much harder on our 10-year plans.
I love that, because it gets rid of the frustration as well. And I see it, you have my own career, my own work, my own podcast. You get frustrated, you look around, you see other people, and you think, oh, they should be me, and why isn't it me? And there's envy, and there's jealousy, and there's all this other shit at play. But if you're just thinking long term, and if you truly play the long game, then things will work out, Yep. I think it was sick what you said there about, the kind of compound effect around consistency is that, you said the element of grit and passion. One thing I ask everybody, and something I would want to ask you more so than anyone else, is like, how do you find that passion? And how has it been for you? Has it been through hard things, more difficult things, more challenging things? Because for a lot of people, it takes so long to do. And to your point earlier with the lawyer, you could lose those vital years.
Yeah. Passion's a funny word, because it and this is exactly not what Angela Duckworth is talking about when you read into it. I think when people say you got to be passionate about something, it's like our understanding of that means that you should wake up every morning, jump out of bed, and love everything that you do and everything about it. Which removes the ability to do any of the hard compounding over time. I think you have to be really into the general principle and the general direction of what you're doing. But there's very little that was enjoyable about racing to the South Pole. But the general principle of being a competitor, the adventure, the training, the hardship of raising the money, the experience, the walking in the footsteps of Shackleton, Scott, and Amundsen, getting there and looking back and celebrating that hard work and the ultimate success. I was passionate about being an adventure athlete, but it came with terrible hardship along the way. So I think we need to be careful about passion. And Jim Collins has a great model called the hedgehog concept, and it sort of marries this idea about what we're passionate about, what you can be world class at, and what's your economic engine. So you can be really, really passionate about lying in bed, but what's your economic engine to be able to fund the bed that you lie in, and the house or the apartment that bed sits in? Indeed, you can be passionate and world class at that particular endeavor, but your economic engine doesn't allow you to do it for very long. However, if you end up doing something that is very, very highly paid, but you absolutely have no interest in it, you're probably pretty good at it if you're being highly paid at it. So you can be world class, your economic engine can be really good, but you've no passion for it, no interest in it. Well, then you're left feeling empty, ground out, and when you're 40, thinking, well, what have we been doing for the last 20 years? So this hedgehog concept by Jim Collins seems to prevent you from going through the merry-go-round of, what am I passionate about? I don't know what I'm passionate about, but everyone else says that they should be passionate about something, and I can't work it out. And then trying to work it out becomes almost overwhelming, I think. So I think we need to be careful about passion, and I think Jim Collins' hedgehog concept is a good something worth looking at.
It's great because I feel like no one is particularly all in on everything. They're like full passion with stuff, love it so much, like mentally stimulated, as well as making the most money out of it. Like even the Gary Vee example is great. Like, that guy even looks like he's worn down from everything at this stage, where he's tried so much different things. He's been working really hard. He's had that hardship, and I feel like there's no benefit as well with things without that hardship. And the economic point is fantastic, because Nick Carlambos, who was on my podcast last week, always says, he was like, if you're not making money from something, it's a hobby. It's just a hobby you do at the end of the day, which is fine, which is completely fine. It's just the fact that you can't necessarily live off it if it's just a fucking hobby at the same time.
Yet you can, like my partner is a human rights lawyer, which is corporate litigation in order to fund her human rights work. So you can operate. In my own case, the economic engine that I had was my speaking business, and that allowed me to fund my adventure racing, which I wouldn't say I was world class, but I was pretty good at putting the teams together to be able to do it. So the thing that you're passionate about can actually be funded by something else. My endeavors to cure paralysis now, we're funding that with my speaking and our global running series. So there are interesting ways of doing your not-for-profit work or your passion projects, but funding it with a slightly different economic engine. As long as that economic engine doesn't doesn't eat up all your time, so you can't do the thing that you might be passionate about.
And that's the thing with those big investment banking jobs. One of the last things I want to leave you on for the last 5 minutes is you mentioned a lot about purpose and even about enjoyment. So I assume you're familiar with Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
I think I've got it over my shoulder, do I?
You probably have. When someone says purpose and someone says purpose and meaning, I see it in top right, actually. That's what I go back to. what have you learned from that book in terms of your general perspective on life?
Well, I think you see one of the master classes that I talk about around this resilience cycle is actually based on a blog that I wrote in intensive care after my accident, and the title of that blog was Optimist, Realist, or something else. How would I respond to adding paralysis to my existing blindness, and with all of that, stripping away of my identity and all of that. And it drew on the experiences of Admiral Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war at the height of the Vietnam War. And without going through all of his story, whenever I got out of hospital and started to research what he was into, he was into the Stoic philosophers. And then I'd been reading Viktor Frankl for 10 years before I broke my back in the aftermath of the paralysis. So you've got Stockdale, you've got Epictetus, who was born into slavery for 30 years and became one of the leading Stoics. You have Viktor Frankl, who wasn't a Stoic, but I think he was, by all intents and purposes, a Stoic. So you've got these examples of people experiencing things at the edge and coming back with some answers for us all to learn from. And Viktor Frankl is no exception on that. But I did seem to be attracted to these particular stories, and that's what fed into my resilience cycle model of confronting the brutal facts, of anchoring ourselves with a sense of control, and then extending timelines towards a better future, which is not. The Stoics rejected the idea of hope, that it was a bad idea. Frankl didn't. I don't think so. This combination of these various influences has helped to inform or helped me to articulate what perhaps I'd been doing all my life, and that was facts, anchoring, and hope.
Yeah, it's crazy how to use those extreme examples, and then that kind of, you can pull your own like life examples and your own struggles in your career, your life, your relationships, and you can use them to your anchor point to these extreme ones of warfare, brutality, a lot of abuse, and then it can be tailored towards different people, which is, I think, is stood the test of time. I think many people I speak with, it's been a huge influence to them, and something I really recommend to people.
And look, in terms of a soundbite, like sitting over all of this now, and I say this publicly when I'm doing my talks in companies, but this is sort of my guiding principle, and it matches up all of these influences, and that is that sometimes we choose our challenges, and sometimes challenges choose us, and what we decide to do about it, that's what counts.
Yeah, 100% agree. Mark, I say a massive thank you. I really appreciate it. I know you're so busy as it is, and I really appreciate taking an hour out of your time to have a chat and get into some detail for young people.
Well, look, thanks for having me on the show, and I hope some of that made sense.